This is Somerset Place. The Collins family were the owners. This is the land they owned. So they had a sawmill. There's the house and the compound. Josiah Collins, the sole owner of the Lake Company Holdings, this is his son or grandson. In 1839, Josiah Collins Jr. died intestate and heavily in debt.
Josiah Collins III and his wife Mary moved into the newly completed plantation house.
In 1861, Josiah and Mary Collins fled from the advancing Union Army to Hillsborough. This is Washington County where I'm at. Josiah Collins died in Hillsborough in 1863. Mary Collins, the owner, transferred ownership to her nephew, William Shepherd, because it was heavily indebted. Mary Riggs Collins dies in 1872. 1867, William Shepherd. 1889, Herbert Page.
Majority of these workers were enslaved. The Lake Company, for instance, purchased a group of 80 native Africans and forcibly brought them here to North Carolina. Additionally, they acquired a group of 81 enslaved African Americans. That is, they were at least first generation born in the United States or in the colonies. And this group was specifically acquired from slaveholders in and around the town of Edenton. And then lastly, the Lake Company hired several free workers. They served as surveyors, as overseers, and in some other specialized roles to begin the project. Now, the enslaved workers, they were forced to not only clear trees and vegetation from the swamp, they were also forced to dig a 6-mile-long canal.
That connected to the Roanoke River.
Connected to the Scuppernong River.
Scuppernong River.
The Scuppernong eventually emptied out into the Albemarle Sound.
Okay. So that's how they would get grain and stuff out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Bring it in on
the
ships
canal.
and then transfer it to barges or whatever, smaller vessels.
Yeah, smaller, just really larger vessels.
And come down this canal to here.
Yeah, the crops would be loaded from barns in this area.
Yeah.
And then sent on flatboats. They would be loaded on flatboats and then sent that direction all the way till they reached the Scuppernong River. And then from there, it's my understanding, there was like a wharf there where there would be larger vessels that would load up the crops for export.
And what kind of grains did they export?
I'll get to that in just a second.
Okay, sorry.
Now going back to the canal, they were forced to dig the canal from the lake to the Scuppernong River, and it took them 2 years to dig. And again, we'll see this canal on the tour. The canal had several functions. As you mentioned, it was used for transporting the crops. It also slowly drained the land of water, making the land livable and farmable. It also provided water power to 2 sawmills and a grist mill, constructed by enslaved and free carpenters in this area of the plantation by 1794, which was about a quarter mile down the road that way.
And it ran a sawmill and grist mill?
Yeah, 2 sawmills and a grist mill.
And how did they get water to flow on this flat property here?
Well, it seems very flat. There is, I guess, enough of a declination of the land going that direction.
There's enough gradient to turn the wheel.
Enough gradient, and then 2, they would use simply water pressure by opening and closing canal locks.
Oh, yeah, the canal lock system.
Exactly, yeah. And they would also, and so they would feed the water into the mill pond, which was here, and they would fill up the mill pond enough and then release the mill pond water into the canal, to power the mill wheels. But yeah, that's essentially how that went. And then lastly, through a network of ditches, as you can see on the map, that again, the slave workers were forced to dig. The canal was used for irrigation. So water from the canal flowed through these ditches and irrigated the adjacent farmland, so that enslaved field workers could cultivate rice.
Rice?
This was a rice plantation initially.
Oh, I didn't know that.
A very northerly rice plantation.
Yeah. Most of them you think of are in South Carolina and Georgia.
South Carolina and Georgia, yeah. So this was a very northerly rice plantation. Enslaved workers, they also harvested lumber from the swamp, which the owners exported for profit. Those were the initial cash crops. Over time, though, that changed. Enslaved workers, starting in the 1820s, they started to cultivate corn, wheat, peas, potatoes, flax, a little bit of cotton, and a couple other things. So there's that. Now, going back to the Lake Company, ultimately Josiah Collins I took sole ownership of this company and thus the plantation. And then in 1816 was when Josiah named the plantation Somerset Place. So that's the first time we see that name.
1860, what happened?
1816 was when Josiah named the plantation Somerset.
Oh, Somerset, okay.
Yeah, and he named it after his birthplace in England. That was a place called Somersetshire. He died a couple of years later in 1819, and then Somerset was inherited by Josiah Collins II.
Now, at that time, was this plantation house here?
No, not yet.
He didn't live on, the original owner didn't live on the property.
Yeah, Josiah Collins I and II, they lived in Edenton. Periodically, they would travel to Somerset to just see what was going on.
Yeah.
But they lived in Edenton. It's Josiah III that would come to actually reside here, and that would come to live in the house that was built over there. But Josiah II, he continued where his father had left off. He continued to expand the plantation. And he also started to prepare the plantation for his son, Josiah III, to not only own it, but actually come and physically live here. And when we get to the year 1829, again, under Josiah II's ownership, the plantation grew to include 50 buildings, like houses, barns, and stables. And also in that same year, the enslaved labor force had grown to a population of 229 men, women, and children.
Wow.
So
was that the maximum of the whole?
No,
they had more than that?
Right, yeah.
Later on? Wow.
So it was becoming clear that Somerset is becoming more and more profitable for the Collinses. Now, Josiah II, he passed away in 1839. That was when Somerset was fully inherited by Josiah Collins III. It's Josiah III's time period that we really focus on interpreting as Somerset today. All the historic buildings that were here were built during his time. This is also the time period where we have the best documentation about what life was like here. Now, Josiah III moved here with Mary Collins, his new wife, in 1830, and they ultimately had 6 kids. And by the time Josiah III took full ownership, Somerset was becoming one of the largest and wealthiest planters' estates in all of North Carolina. Planters' estates like Somerset, they all shared a couple characteristics that made them distinct in North Carolina society and culture. For one, large planters' estates, they tended to have a very large enslaved labor force. At the plantation's peak in 1860, Somerset was home to 328 enslaved workers. And And so that was the maximum that we think, the maximum population of enslaved persons was in that year.
Now, when did they take cotton? Did they make cotton here? Grow cotton here.
Yeah, they did grow a little bit of cotton, but it wasn't a major cash crop. It was corn
So
and
it
wheat.
never was a cotton plantation. I mean, not major. That wasn't a major.
Not in the sense that you would think of, being in the deep south. It wasn't a cotton plantation
yeah.
like those in the deep south. A little bit of cotton was grown here, but it was actually corn and wheat. Those were the two major cash crops. Cumulatively, spanning the years 1786 until 1865, there were at least 861 enslaved Africans and African Americans. So by that,
800?
861 over the span of
the entire years. History of it.
Yeah. By that metric, Somerset was not only one of the largest plantations in North Carolina, it was one of the largest in the upper south of the United States. Now, planters' estates also, they tended to have a very large home for the owner of the plantation. At this time, most people living in North Carolina, they lived in like 1 to 3 room houses. The Collins home, which is here on the map, is a 14-room house. So it's massive even by today's standards. Additionally, planters' homes, on these planters' estates, they tended to be surrounded by a formal landscape. Enslaved workers, they had to plant trees along miles and miles of roads, canals, and ditches on the property. Additionally, enslaved gardeners, they tended to form gardens as well as an orchard, specifically for use by the Collinses in the owner's compounds.
Now, those sycamore trees, were they planted by the...
Yeah, the largest sycamore trees that were out there, they were planted by enslaved workers.
They're pretty big.
Yeah, they are. They were planted in the early 1800s.
And the cypress trees, too.
Yeah, the ones specifically along the canal, they were planted by enslaved workers. Some of those cypresses are older than the plantation itself. As you see, it's not the original plants, but it's where the original hedges were once planted. Archaeologists in the 1950s, when they were excavating the garden area, they found soil stains. And the soil stains made a pattern of where the hedges were located, and it made this pattern that you see with the hedges today. And it's only a small portion of the garden that's been restored. All that grassy area behind these blue buildings would have also contained gardens, flower beds, ornamental plants, shrubs and trees, as well as an herb and vegetable garden.
So this was strictly an ornamental garden right here?
Yeah, this was like the formal garden area.
And the bricks, did they make the bricks here?
No, we think they were imported to the plantation.
Most of the bricks in on a barge, down on the canal here.
Most of the bricks that you see here today, they're modern, but they were placed where the original bricks were found in the dirt during archaeology. Now, this was the canal. Again, this was dug specifically by the 80 enslaved Africans from 1786 until 1788. It's 6 miles long. It could have held anywhere from 6 to 12 feet of water depth inside of it.
Is that a lock gate right there with it?
The original lock gate, the first in the series of original lock gates would have been where that one is currently located at. This canal still does one of its original functions. It still continues to drain the surrounding land of water, and so this serves as a sort of a present-day reminder of what enslaved workers contributed to this, not only this plantation, but to the infrastructure of the state of North Carolina.
That is a massive tree over there. That's a cypress tree, isn't it?
Yes, cypress tree.
That thing is massive.
Yeah, I think that one, even though it's massive, it's actually younger than some of these trees along the canal.
Really?
I think that one, from what I understand, was planted in the 1850s.
And another thing that's unusual about these cypress trees is you don't see the knees.
No, you see them here and there. Yeah,
they must be getting plenty of water from the canal.
Yeah, definitely.
They must have roots going down into the canal.
Yeah, you'll see the knees every now and then. There's just a lot of vegetation covering them.
And you said this is 6 miles long.
6 miles, yeah. It used to be. Now I think it's been filled in some areas, so it's not a complete canal anymore.
And the fields that they raise the crops would be over here as well?
No, that field during the Collins, during Josiah the Third's era, that was called the East Lawn, and the East Lawn was used by the Collinses for entertainment.
Oh.
So on the East Lawn, there was a series of ornamental trees that were planted. There was also a horse racing track.
Yeah, I was going to ask
Collinses
about
used.
that. Yeah,
Yep,
that was very common, horse racing.
Oh yeah, it was big for men at the time, wealthy men. But yeah, that's what that contained. You can still see some of the ornamental trees still standing. This cypress tree was undoubtedly one of the ornamentals. Now, before we go in the house, actually, please don't touch anything you'll see inside.
What year was this house constructed, or should I wait?
It was constructed sometime in the early 1830s.
1830s.
It was finished by 1837. Oh, it's nice and warm in here, too.
Oh, this feels great.
All right.
Now, when I was here before, the thing that struck me was the floors. The floors had no varnish or, on them.
Yeah, they don't have a finish on them. They're just
But they're all of them are like that. All the colonial houses I've been to are like that.
It varies. I mean, sometimes one thing that happens with floors from these earlier time periods is that over time they get grime built on them.
Yeah.
And that over time accumulates in the form of like a dark layer, just due to oxidation as well as just dirt and stuff. These are pretty well cleaned. They might have been refinished, sometime in the 1900s. It's also worth noting too that during Josiah III's era, most of these floors, at least on the first floor, most of these floors would have had carpet on them.
Oh, okay. That's probably heart of pine too, wood.
Yes, it's heart pine. Yeah, and this was actually imported to the plantation, so they didn't harvest the floorboards at the plantation. As you can see, this is a pretty massive, luxurious house. Simply having such a large living space, you put the Collinses in the small percentage of people that signify the wealthy class. Most people living in North Carolina lived in like 1 to 3 room houses. And we'll go room by room, but I'll start by talking about the parlor, which is that room. The parlor was a major social space in the house. It was where the Collinses entertained guests and where they all waited until dinner was served to them in the dining room. One way the Collins entertained was to play music. Not only are several Collins family members skilled musicians, but also several of their regular guests. Next to the parlor is the library. Like the parlor, it was a social space. And it was where the Collinses in particular showed off their level of education, through the accumulation.
This is the library here.
Through the accumulation of many, many books that they had. Another way the Collinses entertained guests was to host book clubs or reading clubs. So in these 2 rooms, you can see one of the key characteristics of this planter elite social class that the Collinses were in. And that was the concept of leisure. Remember, the Collinses, they did not have to work, so they had a lot of free time to do these fun, leisurely things.
I'm sure they were well read.
Very well read.
That is quite a mirror there.
Yes, it's an enormous.
And when they would have visitors, often the visitors would stay for an extended length of time, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would, and I'll talk about that when we go upstairs.
Okay.
Let's go into this room now.
And what is this?
This was the office. This was where Josiah and Mary created and kept the business records for the plantation. Examples of those documents that they made that we were talking about earlier
Yeah.
that have been saved, there's photocopies of those documents throughout this room. And these documents, they give us a glimpse into how the plantation was run from a business standpoint. To assess the profitability of the plantation, Josiah would track weather patterns. He would track crop prices, crop rotation in the fields. He even tracked the monetary values of enslaved workers. Because he frequently bought and sold enslaved persons and made those decisions here in this room, we think this room was seen as a room of power. Again, at the stroke of a pen, Josiah III can change somebody's life.
You know, one of the things that's striking about the handwriting is so nice. You know, they were very conscientious about their handwriting back then, weren't they?
Yeah.
And they had to use a feather to write with.
Well, at this time they're using not fountain pens, but like this right here. I guess you would call that a fountain pen.
Oh, okay.
So they're,
Yeah, I see.
At this time they're using stuff like that.
Okay.
But still, yeah, it's handwriting was definitely a very important skill, especially among the upper class. Now throughout the house, you'll see mainly period antiques, stuff from the time period and of the style the Collinses had. There are a few items that we know were owned by the Collinses. That portrait of Josiah Collins I, as well as these 4 chairs, and then this leather pistol holster here. This book right here, as well as these 3 books, these were all items that once owned by the Collinses.
And that is a very unusual bookcase there, or desk. What is that thing?
It's a secretary with
Secretary.
a bookcase.
Uh-huh.
It's technically what it's called. But yeah, so it's a secretary with bookcase. It's for writing.
Got marble on the facing on the fireplace.
Yep.
And look at this clock here.
I think it's a French clock. You'll see a similar one when we go into the dining room. Yeah.
So this was the patriarch right here.
Josiah the First. Yeah,
Yes.
Josiah Collins the First. That's him. Let's go into this room next.
And the ceilings are 10 feet?
I couldn't tell you.
Pretty high, huh?
honestly. It's a good guess, though. It's a very good guess.
Now, what would this room be?
This room, it was called the butler's pantry, and this room connected food preparation, which was done in the house, to food service done in the house. So the enslaved cooks prepared the meals in the outside kitchen, but then they brought the cooked food and transferred it to enslaved butlers that waited in this room.
Did they come through that?
They transfer the food through this window right here.
Uh-huh.
And that the window opens up,
Yes.
as well as those flaps underneath, they also open up to allow for easy transfer.
Yeah.
It's called a butler's door, or it's also called a jib window. Once the food was transferred, the enslaved butlers plated the food in this room. So that was the primary function of the room. It's where they plated the food, made the food look nice on the plates, they seasoned a little bit before serving it in the dining room. This may have also been a space where the enslaved domestic workers in the house that might have had their meals or took breaks there.
Do you know the name of this piece of furniture here?
It's called a sideboard.
Sideboard.
That sideboard right there was originally owned by the Collinses, along with this glass decanter for your wine or your liquor. I believe that circular table there was also owned by the Collinses, as well as these 2 tiger maple chairs there.
And the windows were another luxury for that era too, weren't they?
You know, at this time, glass and thus windows are starting to get a little bit more affordable, but in many ways, yeah. It's like middle to upper class people would have windows. Let's go into the dining room next.
Wow, look at that table. That is amazing.
It is.
So they could have 8 guests at a time, or maybe one,
They're
2 on the
probably-
end?
Like the 2 armchairs right here, for instance, they would have been on each end of the table, I think.
Uh-huh.
And so there would have been 2 extra chairs that the table could accommodate. The dining room is probably the most important social space in the house, and it was exclusively the domain of Mary Collins. One of the well-defined roles, excuse me, for a wealthy planter's wife was to be in charge of the dining experience.
The hostess.
Of course, she did this by overseeing the enslaved cooks. She
Uh-huh.
dictated the recipes to them. She selected menu items. Mary also ensured the ingredients for the meals were on the plantation before cooking began. And then lastly, she was responsible for decorating this room as well as the rest of the house. So she selected everything from the tableware to the drapes and the curtains and the windows.
And I guess a lot of that was probably imported.
Yeah,
Europe.
Yeah. Now this dining room table, along with that French clock, and then that mahogany cabinet there, as well as various articles of tableware, were also owned by the Collinses. Additionally, these 2 portraits depicting Josiah III's parents, they were also owned by the Collinses. That's a portrait of a woman named Anne Rebecca Daves, and she was from New Bern. That was Josiah III's mother. That was Josiah III's father, Josiah II. Any questions?
And I like the shutters in these old houses.
Yeah, storm shutters.
What kind of liqueurs would they, liqueurs or alcoholic beverage?
The Collinses, they like to drink a lot of brandy. Sometimes they drink like white liquors, like whiskey. But it was mainly brandy. They also drink wine. They drank a lot of wine, especially wines imported from Europe. There's even a reference to them ordering lager beer for the plantation.
Wow.
So,
Surely that didn't come from Europe.
yeah, that I have no idea.
That had to be somewhere local.
Could have been. Yeah.
But wow, yeah, that would. So they would import. That had to be a kind of expensive thing too, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Now the brandy, a lot of local farmers
Would make
brandy, and Josiah III might have purchased the brandy from them.
Yeah.
Or from places a little bit further afar.
And they would have long, leisurely meals, dinners, meals, and lots of discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah, this was a
Very
social
social thing, wasn't
space. This was where they would eat, but also where they would converse.
And they had good table manners too, didn't they?
Yeah, knowing the table manners was very important to sitting at this table. This is where Mary Collins would also sort of express her hospitality, as well as the Collinses' wealth and culture and taste. Let's go to the second floor next.
Now, this door right here, that looks bigger than the other door there. Is it the same size?
Yes, I think they're similar in size. That leads out to the lakeside porch. That porch was used by the Collinses for entertainment. Most of the porches on the house were used for entertainment, except for the service porches were right out this door here.
And on these steps, is this painted?
It's painted to look like marble.
Yes.
It's not the original paintwork, but we think the Collinses did have paintwork like this
Yes.
on various places in the house. The second floor, this is where the Collinses, the adults, slept. The Collinses were not the only ones staying in the house. They typically had large groups of guests stay with them, usually for extended periods of time.
Who would we stay with?
Family and friends.
Oh, okay.
These gatherings, they typically took place in the wintertime. It was during then the Collinses usually had 14 regular guests. Imagine having 14 house guests.
Wow.
Yeah, and when they all went to bed at night, they used this linen cabinet here. It's the only piece of furniture that has stayed inside the house this entire time.
Just right here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a linen cabinet?
Mm-hmm. It would have contained bed linens as well as mosquito netting for use in the summertime.
Look at this hallway here. This is massive, isn't it?
A massive hallway, yeah.
Now, is it my imagination or is there a slope?
It's not your imagination, that's real.
I thought so.
Yeah.
From a settlement.
Yeah.
And old houses are like that.
Yeah, from my understanding is the house is already having some settling issues, but in the 2000s some major foundation work was done on the house, and I guess the engineers involved with the project decided to make the settling like permanent instead of readjusting it. They just made it a permanent feature of the house by supporting it with.
Now, when I went to England and saw those houses there, the ones that 400, 500, 600 years old, they're all different angles.
Yeah, different angles. Yeah, not only sloping down, but they're like angled to the side.
Some of them are almost comical in a way.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, even in the United States, a lot of the old houses are like that.
Yeah.
Very narrow, narrow halls, floors are sloping in all different. It's just it's comical, as you said. I'll point out the master bedroom, which is that room there. This is where Josiah and Mary slept at. And like the office, it was seen as a room of power, and that Josiah III could monitor enslaved workers by looking out those several windows. There's a portrait of Josiah Collins above the bed. Above the fireplace. He's above the fireplace.
Yes.
And Josiah III's wife, Mary, is above the bed. It's a little bit harder to see her portrait from that angle.
Yeah.
But those were owned by the Collinses, those portraits, along with the bed itself. That chest of drawers there, as well as that nightstand between the chest of drawers and bed, were also owned by them.
And they didn't have closets in that area, did they?
There are several original closets in the house.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. It just signifies just the fact that the Collinses had a lot of belongings and they just needed more storage space. This room, we're not entirely sure what it was used for. Might have either been a nursery or perhaps a sitting room or a dressing room. This room, we do know what it was for. This was a guest bedroom, and it was the bedroom of a regular guest of the house named Alethea. Now, at first, she was actually a permanent resident of the house when she was a teenager, and the reason why was that her father, Josiah II, passed away before she reached the age of adulthood, and because of that, Josiah III, her older brother, served as her legal guardian. So she resided here at Somerset Place, lived in this room. Eventually she moved out. She moved to Edenton to live. But she would come and visit her brother often here still. And Alethea Collins was a pretty wealthy woman. She inherited a somewhat large fortune from her father, Josiah II. But, with that money, she made a lot of business investments. She ultimately accumulated property, both land as well as enslaved workers. And because of all these things, she was considered to be a very eligible bachelorette among the wealthy class in North Carolina. She waited a long time to get married, though. She married when she was 38 years old, which in American culture, a woman marrying at that age was very, very unusual.
Did she have any children?
Yeah.
Wow.
When she did marry, though, was with arguably the wealthiest man that lived in Edenton. His name was Thomas Bourne. They married not in Edenton, but in Hillsborough. As I was saying earlier, the Collinses lived in Hillsborough during the Civil War. They lived at the Burwell School, and it was there that Alethea and Thomas got married.
Oh, okay, wow. And this right here is a necessity here?
Yeah, sometimes it's called a necessaire, I think.
Necessaire.
Yeah, it's a it's also known as an easy chair. The easy chair is the chair itself. It's called that because it's a very cushiony chair to sit in.
Yes.
Oftentimes, the easy chair is a way that you can insert and use a chamber pot inside. Now the Collinses, they either use the outhouses outside, or if it was at night, or if the weather was bad, they would use chamber pots inside. And that colored print hanging above the fireplace, this was owned by Alethea Collins. Have a look at it, and if you can guess what famous story it's depicting, you'll receive extra credit.
Now we're talking about what now? The mantle?
Yeah, that colored print above the mantle.
Oh, the print.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me what famous story is depicting.
Is this Moses?
You're right. Yep.
Really?
That's Moses. Moses is sitting on the rock right here. That's the Red Sea.
Oh, yeah.
Now, instead of buying actual paintings at the time, what a lot of the wealthy people did, they would purchase prints based off of popular paintings. The painting this is based off of was done by an artist named Francis Danby. It's a color print too, so it's a little bit costlier than a typical print.
Yeah.
I'll point out this was a guest bedroom here.
Well, one question before we leave the room. What is this right here? Just a little
It's
secretary desk?
it's sometimes it's often referred to as a work table. And work tables, sometimes they had a way for you to sew on them, so they might have been used for sewing. Also, they could have been used for writing, as you see. So there's sort of like a multi-purpose desk.
Yeah.
These work tables, though, were almost exclusively a feminine piece of furniture. So yeah,
And this is a fan right here.
yeah, that's a fan. And that's supposed to, I think, represent a Valentine that Alethea received from one of her potential suitors.
And this is a pretty impressive bed here, too.
It is, yeah. It has no association with the Collinses, as far as I know. It's just a very fancy bed for a woman that had very explicit taste. That is a guest bedroom. And once you look at that, we can go upstairs.
Now, these couches, sofas here, wasn't it some kind of Napoleonic or something like that? Do you know what the...
The style?
Yes.
Yeah, it's referred to as American Empire style.
Empire style, that's what I said.
Yeah, that was the furniture style. It's popular from like 1820 to 1840.
And look at these. Kind of unusual chariot there, pulled by a serpent with wings. Now somebody had imagination there, didn't they?
Yeah, prints like that depicting Greek and Roman mythology were popular for displaying in wealthy people's
Satiro.
houses.
He must have been a goddess. And what does it say up there?
Giove, I think.
Giove.
Giove. Saturn.
And that's
Saturno is Saturn. I don't know who Giove is.
It's pulled by, looks like some birds or something there.
Yeah. And then over here is,
Oh, there's more of them.
that's Diana, and that is Mercurio, which obviously is Mercury. And he's being pulled by two roosters. And again, that's part of the mythology of those gods and goddesses. Let's go to the third floor.
This is a children's bedroom here.
The third floor was for the Collins' children. The third floor was also where a hired nanny stayed and took care of the kids. Josiah and Mary, as I said earlier, had 6 kids. All 6 of the kids were boys, but only 3 of the kids lived to be adults. Tragically, 2 of the Collins' sons, Everett and Hugh, they were ages 9 and 11, I think, they drowned in the canal.
Both the same time, or?
At the same time, the same day.
My goodness.
They were playing in a boat along with 2 of their assigned enslaved playmates. It was a cold February day. The playmates' names were Anderson and Zacharias. They were slightly younger than the kids. The Collins' boys, as well as the 2 enslaved playmates, drowned when the boat capsized.
Wow. I guess people didn't know how to swim in those days. They didn't.
We think
Kids.
at least the Collins' boys, we think knew how to swim. It was just the fact that the water was cold.
Oh, okay.
There was a water current resulting from the locks and gates being open, as well as the fact that they were wearing heavy wool clothing.
So it was hypothermia then, probably.
Maybe.
Well, what a tragedy.
Then a third Collins son named William Kent Collins, he died on the plantation in 1857 as a result of a horseback riding accident. And so many tragedies befell these Collins children. And again, the third floor is where the Collins' children stayed up until about the age of 10. And around that time,
10 years old, you said?
yeah, around the age of 10, that's when they moved into the boarding school.
And these are just little storage closets
Yes,
right
little
here?
storage closets, might be used for bed linens, for clothing.
And this bedroom in the back here, is that a playroom? Is that what that is?
Yeah, the playroom is the room with the fan window. There's a
Yes.
second bedroom in between, in front of the toilet.
What, is this the girls' bedroom here?
No, remember the Collinses didn't have any girls. It was just a
Oh,
second
that's right,
bedroom.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it was a second bedroom.
Look at this. It had probably had cedar shingles on the roof.
On the roof, yeah, I would think so.
This was like a nanny's room here.
Yeah, that was where the hired nanny stayed, took care of the kids. Her name was Charlotte Cabarrus, and she was a free African American woman. She was not always free, though. She was actually enslaved as a young girl to the Cabarrus family that lived in the town of Eatontown. But she was set free when she turned 8 years old.
She was part of the Collins enslaved.
No, she had no association.
So
no
they were
association
paying.
with the
She was a
Collins.
hired worker.
Yeah, she was a hired worker. And the reason why we think she was emancipated was because her father was also her enslaver. So this was an instance where a slaveholder had relations with one of his enslaved women. Now, as a nanny, Charlotte performed childcare responsibilities because she was a hired free worker. She received a yearly paycheck, as well as free room and board for her employment.
And she was free to come and go as she traveled.
Yeah, but she usually spent, she spent most of her time with the Collinses simply because the job demanded it. She was allowed to, by law, freely move around.
Yeah.
But she did have to provide some proof of her freedom in the form of papers if she, in particular, left this county.
And then you were talking about sometimes enslaved people would be allowed to go off the property on holidays and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but they had to walk, didn't they?
Yeah, they had to walk. Sometimes
They
they
didn't
would
go
take,
far.
They might have taken ferry, because there was a ferry that ran from near where Plymouth is into Eatontown.
Oh, okay.
So enslaved people might have taken that ferry into Eatontown. They might have taken maybe even a wagon too, but I'm not sure. They definitely would have had to walk in most cases. Charlotte she was the only free African American working and living here, so she had a lot of free time.
There's a spot right here that goes down a little bit, doesn't it?
Where?
I don't know if this is bowing up. It feels like it's tilting down.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Charlotte was the only free African American working and living here. So she had a pretty unusual position in the social structure.
Yeah.
When the kids got old enough that they didn't require a nanny anymore, she became the head housekeeper. She moved her bedroom into the playroom down there, which by then the kids weren't using anymore.
Yeah.
And it was in that room that she passed away in 1860. When she passed
Well,
away,
she was part of the family then, more or less, wasn't she?
yeah. The Collinses, when she passed away, she had never married, nor did she have any children. And so, it's obvious that in her role as a nanny, she had to sacrifice a lot of her social life in service of the Collinses. I'm going to show you one more thing before I conclude the tour. Also note these wooden brackets, they would have secured a baby gate at the time.
You put a little fence right here.
Yeah, a little fence there.
And as far as the heating, was there any heating up? There's one fireplace there.
Yeah, there's fireplaces in every...
In each of the rooms, but not upstairs.
Yeah, in every room except for the upstairs.
Yeah. And just keeping those fires going in the wintertime was a full-time job.
Yeah, and there was enslaved persons that had to do that. There was specifically a group of enslaved...
Now this is a guest bedroom here.
Guest bedroom in there, yeah. Yeah, there was a group of enslaved men that were solely responsible for stocking the fireplaces.
Oh, this is where those steps go down at. Nice view from up here.
These two porches were service porches. This is how the enslaved domestic workers entered and exited the house. And what I wanted to show you was this cabinet right here. This blue cabinet is very unusual. I've not seen something like this before. And we think it stored medicine. It stored not only the Collins' private medicine that they use in their own home, but also the medicines used by the doctors in the hospital. It was built outside specifically so the doctors could come and access it without having to go inside the house and interrupt the Collins.
Yeah, that is very unusual.
What's that?
It's very unusual.
There's another cabinet on the opposite lakeside porch of the house. We think that cabinet was used to store the Collins' liquor.
And the shutters, all these old houses have shutters on them, storm shutters, right?
Right, storm shutters, yeah.
When the wind gets to howling and raining or hurricanes, look at that cedar tree there. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's the sycamore right there.
I mean sycamore.
Yeah. I'm going to conclude the tour out in the grass. When you come down these steps, please be careful. Watch your head. Well, do you have any final questions before I conclude the tour?
You have done a wonderful job. I really appreciate it.